dreaming about it. I can see the day. Thinking about it, overthinking. Then I tell myself that I'm not okay. Thinking about it, overthinking. Stuck in my head, 'cause I've made mistakes. Thinking about, and I don't know how to trust myself, and I don't know the way. Thinking about it. I've been dreaming about it. I can see the day, but then I tell myself that I'm not okay. I'm stuck in my head because I've made mistakes and I don't know how to find my way. You know, so many of you guys asked me if I could do a version of the Ending Racism article on video. And so here it is. And you know I wasn't gonna do a version of this whole article without singing to you first. And that's quite literally because the music is the sugar that makes the medicine go down. The music is what helps us anchor it from our minds into our hearts. And that's because the music can minister. You know, one of the things that I always say is that music, especially for African American culture, has never just been about entertainment. The arts were never for entertainment. It's always been a form of healing. And so we welcome in song as we dive deep into our hearts to heal the soul of America and the soul of the world. And so with that being said, let's begin. This is Ending Racism, How to Change the World in One Generation. You know, almost every piece of work or literature that I've read on racism is built on one assumption, that it cannot end, or at best that it will be a lifelong fight, that ending racism will be something that will probably never happen in our generation. Most of the quotes that you hear about the fight against racism sound something like this. We used to say that ours is not the struggle of one day, 1 week, or 1 year. Ours is not the struggle of one judicial appointment or presidential term. Ours is the struggle of a lifetime, or maybe even many lifetimes, and each one of us in every generation must do our part. That was by John Lewis, late civil rights leader and former US representative. But if we all continue to say that racism is something that can never end in our generation, then who the hell ever gets to take responsibility for ending it? Enter us. We still have a dream, but we are the vessel for the dreams our ancestors were unable to dream. You know, the current work and research on anti-racism is phenomenal, and so is the tireless work that's been done by our ancestors for generations. But much of this work has one fatal flaw. It's created from the automatic assumption, whether it's subconscious or conscious, that racism is unlikely to ever end. And if that's our starting point, if that's the plateau from which we're writing our books and creating our podcasts and doing our activism and our anti-racist work, then we're missing a big opportunity here. I'm not saying becoming anti-racist or dismantling white supremacy isn't important work. The current anti-racist and equality work has real impact. It is saving lives, it's creating systemic change, it's bringing us together, and that matters tremendously. I'm also not minimizing the centuries of incredible work done by civil rights leaders like John Lewis and Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks and Harriet Tubman and Patrisse Cullors and the thousands of countless names that we'll never know. Because without them, we would never have the opportunity to even consider ending racism. What I am saying is this. Imagine how much more important our work becomes if it were done in a different context. If it were done not just as some sort of boot camp to be in a lifelong fight, but with a common, united goal of actually ending racism in this generation. Here's what fighting against something looks like. But here is what moving toward something looks like. Congressman John Lewis was right. Our generation does have the opportunity to do something incredible. We have the opportunity to end racism and to do it within this generation. Notice what comes up for you when I say end racism. And notice what you feel when we put a timeline on it. Do you feel hopeful, skeptical, cynical? Are you thinking, who the hell does this guy think he even is? Are you wishing I would define race and racism? Are you hoping for a plan? Good. That's all part of our pathway forward. But before we can begin to look at how to end racism, both systemic and internalized, I think it's important that we understand what makes racism persist. Because once you've been stuck in a condition, once you've been working on the same recurring problem over and over to no end, it becomes important to shift the question from what is the problem to why does the problem continue to persist in the first place. And in part, racism persists because of these 5 shared yet individual assumptions. Number 1, racism is unavoidable. Number 2, race matters. Number 3, those people will never change. Number 4, real change takes a long time. And number 5, we don't know how to end it. So what do I mean by shared yet individual assumptions? Well, before we can even get into breaking down any concepts about ending racism, we first have to explore what I mean by shared yet individual assumptions. We must own and acknowledge that we, as individuals and as a collective, see things through a certain lens or perspective. And if enough people agree on a certain perspective, then that perspective becomes our collective reality and belief. And I'm not talking about the woo-woo, like law of attraction stuff here, even though I love that stuff. I'm talking about perception and belief in the most tangible of ways. For example, throughout much of ancient history, it was widely believed that the earth was flat. People literally thought if they traveled far enough, they might fall off the edge of the earth into an abyss of nothingness. Ancient civilizations from Greece and Egypt to Asia all believed this to be true, and so they created their reality based upon that belief. We see it depicted in art and stories and religion, and ultimately their shared beliefs about the world. Now, I know you might be thinking, well, we've evolved beyond that sort of foolery. But let's look at another untrue yet harmless shared perspective that we all maintain today. Our belief that the sun sets. Now, there's a shared perspective that the sun sets, but the sun doesn't really set. Think about it. Would the sun appear to set from the perspective of an astronaut who is far away from the Earth's orbit? No. The Earth would be turning on its axis as it circles around the sun. But from our shared perspective here on the planet, there's an agreed upon belief that the sun sets. On the foundation of this belief, we've created our reality, the structure of our lives, and our world. This leads me to an important point. Our world is created upon shared beliefs, even if those beliefs aren't necessarily true. So to end racism, we must first own and acknowledge that we, as individuals and as a collective, see things through a sometimes faulty lens. And if enough people choose to see through the same faulty lens, for example, Black people should be slaves or women are inferior, then that chosen perspective becomes the context through which we live our lives. And in essence, if enough people share the same socially perceived illusions, those illusions cause a certain way of life to persist. Now, with that in mind, let's dismantle the 5 faulty perspectives that might be causing racism to persist. Number 1, racism is unavoidable. Here's the thing. It's been proven by neuroscientists and psychologists around the world that racism is learned. It's not some automatic human condition that we're born with. And it's not something that just happens as a result of putting a bunch of diverse people on a planet together. And I'm not sharing this with you as an idea or an opinion. It is widely respected and proven by science that racism itself is not a given. It's not unavoidable. What is likely unavoidable, however, is the fact that we create what's called in-groups and out-groups to keep ourselves safe. And terror management studies show that we have a tendency to treat people in our in-group more kindly and people in our out-group more harshly. Yet even with this scientific knowledge, the idea of using race as a way of defining who's in our in-group and out-group is something we can eliminate if we try. But we the people are funny creatures. When we can't figure out a quick solution to something, most of us label it as unavoidable, inevitable, unfortunate, but unlikely to change. Yet the idea that racism is unavoidable would be like saying that the Holocaust was unavoidable, or that American slavery was unavoidable, or that refusing the LGBTQIA+ community the right to marry was unavoidable. There's a real danger in saying something is unavoidable because we immediately absolve ourselves of taking responsibility to change it. We throw our hands up in the air and say, well, can't do anything about that. Can't do anything about slavery. Can't do anything about gay marriage. Can't do anything about the spread of HIV. Can't do anything about women's rights. Nope. Can't do anything about racism until somebody does. Number 2, race matters. I'm going to say something that's sometimes hard for people to face, especially for my fellow people of color. Race is a complete fabrication of the human mind that's used for power and control. It's a social construct, a delusion, an imaginary truth, or alternative fact, if you will, that we've all continued to build our lives and civilizations upon. There's no such thing as race. None. There's just a human race, scientifically, anthropologically. That was from Toni Morrison, novelist and professor. Now, I want to be very clear here. I don't want you for 1 second to think that I'm saying that the effects of racism aren't real. The trauma, the deaths, the lives lost, and the impact of racism and the persistent collective belief in the idea of race has had very real consequences. It has created wars, dismantled countries, pitted religions against one another, and taken innocent Black and brown lives for generations. Racism has caused incredible harm and trauma which cannot be minimized. I'm also not suggesting we put all of our cultures and values and traditions into a Vitamix to make some vegan, we are all one, raceless smoothie. We don't need to give up our culture, values, and traditions or become one big melting pot in order to end racism. No. What we have the opportunity to do is far greater than that. So while this can be a triggering or hard thing to stomach, the concept of race is literally imaginary. Someone created it to gain and maintain power and control, and now we use it to control ourselves. Race is not real. Heritage is real. Culture is real. Tradition is real. Appropriation is real. Skin color is real. Trauma is real. But race, not real. Or it's as real as we make it. For comparison and to understand this a little more clearly, let's consider the concept of gender. While sex is a biological fact of nature, meaning we're born with different anatomy, gender is a cultural or historical interpretation. Gender is not a fact. Skin color is a biological fact. Race is a cultural or historical interpretation. Race is not a fact. The thing is, I don't think most of us actually care that much about race. Sure, we care about our traditions and cultures and ancestors and customs and languages and especially our foods and religious landmarks. But race? Really? Take a moment to think about it. If you could keep all of your traditions, customs, and practices, and the beauty of who we all are as differentiated, unique humans with our own rituals and historical contexts, if you could continue assembling with like-minded individuals and celebrating your values and celebrating your diversity, if you could keep all that and be treated equally with humanity and dignity, how important would the individual concept of race be? What's it for? What's its function? I gotta give it to the person who came up with the concept of racism means to enforce power and control, even if I don't want to. Because if their mission was to separate us, well, it worked. Racism created race, not the other way around. We were taught to care about race, and so we did. Now here we are, holding on to this thing that we don't even really care about, but that's causing us harm and pain and war and genocide and trauma over and over and over. And then saying, even though we don't care about this, even though it's not real, even though it's causing us harm, it's unlikely to ever end. Why? Number 3, those people will never change. Now, there's a commonly held belief that those people over there will never change. Yet all throughout life, we can point to and tell stories of people who have changed. And not just people out there, but people in your life and family line. I think about my buddy Greg, a white guy who grew up in Tennessee with a bunch of racist friends and family members who believed, literally, that black people were stupid and lazy. He said, "I used to believe that if black people were making 20% less than whites, it's because black people must be working 20% less hard or weren't as smart or capable. That something must be wrong with them genetically, especially because I had always thought everyone had the same equal access to opportunity." Greg went on to say, "If I hadn't dramatically messed up my life, if I would have still been working in finance with a house on a lake and a bunch of toys like many of the people I grew up with, I would probably still be a white supremacist with a Confederate flag hanging from my truck." But that's not the Greg that I know. The Greg I know went through a massive change 15 years ago. And the reason we met was because I gave a talk at his company about ending racism, and he came up to me afterward asking for resources to help his 5-year-old son grow up on the right side of history. Greg is committed to making sure his young white son doesn't grow up racist. And even though Greg is doing his own anti-racist work, he was afraid he wasn't equipped to teach his son properly. And what I did is I actually referred him to Layla Saad's upcoming young reader's book and a kid's book about racism by Jelani Memory. Now, Greg, a man who used to be a racist white supremacist, is now someone who cares deeply about social justice. And the change didn't happen when he was 12, it happened when he was 35. We all know a Greg. They're not rare. Point to your once racist family members, your formerly tone-deaf coworkers, your used-to-be homophobic relatives, and even the ways in which you've personally grown over the years. People change all the time. Racists are not exempt. So to me, the question becomes, what causes people to change? Is it always for selfish reasons? For financial gain? Does it take a personal relationship? A direct experience? Do they have to mess up their life like Greg did? Fine. Instead of arguing over what are the right or wrong reasons for change, let's use them to our advantage and create a model for racial healing where all of those conditions can be met and met quickly. Number 4, real change takes a long time. Okay, so let's assume we're in agreement here. But even if we all agree that racism is unavoidable and that we don't really care about the concept of race and that people can change, ending racism in our generation is still unrealistic because real change takes a long time, right? You already know what's coming. But before I say it, let's look at some of the most massive changes in recent human history. The start and end dates that I'm about to mention represent unmistakable widespread shifts. I want you to keep in mind that a generation is typically considered 20 to 25 years. Let's begin. In 1973, the first phone call was made on a handheld cellular device. And in 1995, widespread global use of mobile phones happened. That was 22 years. The creation of the World Wide Web happened in 1991. But in 2001, we had total widespread use of the internet. That's 10 years. 1981, first documented case of HIV in the United States. 1995, ability to detect, treat, and live with HIV. 14 years. 2004, first US state legalizes same-sex marriage. 2015, national legalization of same-sex marriage. 11 years. 1831, first knowledge of slaves escaping through the Underground Railroad and the start of abolitionism. 1865, end of the Civil War, 34 years. 1903, Wright brothers take their first flight. 1920, widespread commercial airline travel begins, 17 years. 1929, start of the Great Depression. 1945, end of the Great Depression, 16 years. 1933, Hitler's first ever position of leadership in the formation of the Nazi Party. 1945, end of the Holocaust, 12 years. 1957, first satellite launched into space. 1969, man lands on the moon. 12 years. So I ask the question again. Does real change take a long time? No. In almost all of these cases, it took less than one generation, less than 20 to 25 years to make a widespread global change. Does every change in human history fall in this timeline? Of course not. Were there years of unrewarded labor that came before the cited start dates? Absolutely. My intention here is not to minimize the generations of work that have come before us, but to help you notice that once the ground has been prepared, which it is now, real change can happen, and it can happen fast. So let's clean that little smudge off of our dirty lens of perception and move on to the final point. Number 5, we don't know how to end it. If we knew how to end racism, we would have already ended it, right? Do I even need to say it this time? Here's the thing. The assumption that we don't know how to end racism assumes that there are no solutions. But that's not true. There are plenty of not just good, but excellent solutions for ending racism that were created by researchers and anti-racist scholars and universities and entire college campuses dedicated to the cause. For generations, people have created models, systems, instructors, and written New York Times best-selling books, any of which could easily solve this problem. And I'm not talking hypothetically, there's proof. We've seen the problem solved in micro but significant ways all throughout time in our organizations, our communities, and even in our own families. We aren't waiting for better solutions. Just like we weren't waiting for better solutions to end slavery, and we didn't need better solutions to end the Holocaust. As a society, as individuals, and as a collective, we needed to be willing and to be ready. And the same thing stands for us today. We need to be willing and ready for our solutions to work. Are we so bound in our pain that we are not ready for liberation? Nico Carey, writer and mindfulness teacher. Ending racism. So, if none of these things are causing racism to persist, if racism is unavoidable is an inaccurate perspective, and race matters is an inaccurate perspective, and those people will never change is an inaccurate perspective, and real change takes a long time is an inaccurate perspective, and we don't know how to end it is an inaccurate perspective. Then what do we need to do to get racism to end? Well, the same thing you do to get racism to persist. You change the shared perspective. The purpose of this video was not to give you better solutions to end racism, nor was it to give you a step-by-step plan on how to do it. It was to get you to consider that ending racism in this generation may not just be possible, but realistic if we're willing and ready. One of my dear mentors, Jim Selman, always says there's lots of conversations about change, but that's different than conversations that actually change something. The key to any major shift in the world has always been the same. Getting enough people to not just believe a cause matters, but to believe that change is possible. Researchers from the University of Pennsylvania and the University of London discovered in a 2018 study that it takes the support of just 25% of people to make a major social shift in the world. Now you might be thinking, well, aren't there already 25% of people who believe racism can end in this generation? I don't think so. I think more than 25% of people want racism to end. I think more than 25% of people believe that racism is wrong. I believe more than 25% of people think the fight against racism matters. But I don't think 25% of people have actually considered that they could be personally responsible for ending racism in this generation. I don't think 25% of people think it can start with us. And it's time to change that. Our call now is simple. It's to get people to believe. We can't fight to end police brutality just for the sake of ending police brutality. We need to fight against police brutality for the sake of ending racism. We shouldn't be dismantling white supremacy just for the sake of creating more diversity in the workplace or becoming nice white people. We need to dismantle white supremacy with the intention of ending racism. We cannot continue to fight for the liberation of our people just to have them encaged again. But we must continue to fight for the liberation of our people to end racism in this generation. If we want to have a breakthrough in ending racism, then we need to realize that it's not going to happen unless we agree upon a timeline for ending it. Saying it's going to end someday is not a commitment. But when we put a stake in the ground and say we're going to end it in our generation, possibilities open up. A new reality emerges. Racism can end, and it can end in this generation if we believe it can. Because if we believe it can, we shift the context of the world. So what do we do next? The goal now is to get as many people as possible to consider that ending racism can and should happen in this generation. And like any meaningful change, we start by doing the work both internally and with our families, friends, colleagues, our communities, and ultimately on a global scale. Each of us spreading the seeds of possibility to the corners of the earth that only we can reach. You see, this is not about stopping the work that we're already doing. This is about doing it with a new purpose, a new intention and a new meaning and a realizable goal. This is about using every means available to us now and every means that becomes available to us in the future to move beyond resignation and fulfill our new, shared yet individual perspective that racism can and will end in this generation. Here are 5 ways that you can help right now. Number 1, sign the pledge. We've created a pledge to end racism with a goal of getting 25% of the population to sign it. If we get 1.9 billion people to sign the pledge, we have enough power not just to end racism in the US, but throughout the world. You can find that at endingracismtogether.com. Number 2, donate. We launched the Ending Racism Grant and Scholarship Fund to support vetted individuals and grassroots organizations who have taken the pledge to end racism. You can donate or apply at wecandreambigger.org. Number 3, stream this song, it's called The Turning, as much as you can. All proceeds go straight to our mission to end racism, and you can find it on any streaming platform. Number 4, show your support. Display the Pledge to End Racism graphics on your website or on your social media or even on the bumper of your car. Remember, this is about spreading an idea. And number 5, share. This video is a free resource. Post it, debate it, share it in your newsletters, do whatever you want with it, but do it with the goal of ending racism. And when an opportunity arises for you to end racism, you will. I can't tell you exactly what you will do because I don't even know exactly what opportunity will arise for you next. But when it comes, you will know. And you'll have a choice to either end racism or not. And you will. I leave you with this. My sister, Shelly Tegelski, who's the founder of Pandemic of Love, once said something to me so dear that I want to pass it along to you. She said, there are 2 types of people in this world, the what ifs and the why nots. Don't be a what if. They're paralyzed in their analysis. Be a why not. Why not me? Why not now? Why not us? Why not believe? And see what happens next. So the next time someone says racism can't end, lovingly reply with, why not? and then send them this video. We the people, we still have a dream. It's a new dream. And that's because we are the vessels for the dreams our ancestors were unable to dream. We are exactly who was meant to be alive at this time. We are enough. And we rise together. Whoa, we can overcome it now. And I know that with you that nothing can bring me down. And I know that with you that nothing can bring me down. And I know that with you that nothing can bring me down. 'Cause we can overcome.